Hey, good people. Welcome to the Evolving Education Project podcast, hosted by me, Dr. Tiffany Amniachai, and friends, where we center the educational joys, passions, interests, and inquiries of people of color. This is episode 26. Coming up, my guest and I question the utility of the identifier people of color and whether we should abandon it as a term of unspoken solidarity and political strategy, given the recent social media uproar around the fact that a large percentage of Latinos voted for Trump in the 2024 presidential election. This dialogue emphasizes the need for nuanced conversations about identity, solidarity, and responsibility in the face of anti-blackness and other forms of oppression, while offering necessary pathways forward. We would like to begin by thanking our YouTube listener at Rachel Running, who shared her beautiful story and a positive review of episode 11 last week. Episode 11 consisted of our book interview with authors Drs. Carla España and Luz Yadira Herrera about their noteworthy book, In Comunidad, Lessons for Centering the Voices and Experiences of Bilingual Latinx Students. Here's an excerpt from her YouTube comment. What an inspirational conversation. I look forward to following and sharing your work with collaborators on La Frontera. Mil gracias. I am an Afro-Chinese Trinidadian from Buffalo, New York. I grew up with family down on the island and in the Southwest. Our island mom embraced all the kids to bring more awareness of the importance of diversity in our schools in northern Arizona. She loved and photographed the Navajo traditional life from the stories of the children in her friend's classroom. We grew up in desert plateaus from the res to hurricanes in Puerto Rico. My soul is smiling, listening. Mil gracias to our children. Resilience through stories. Aw, thank you for sharing your beautiful story with us. It sounds like you come from a legacy of linguistic warriors and organizers. Thank you for your support, and we are honored that you found this episode inspiring. I also want to shout out one listener with the Instagram Drana_6, that is DRANNAA_6, none other than the wonderful newly minted Dr. Adriana Gonzalez Yabera. Proud of you, and thank you for liking several of our Instagram posts in a row yesterday. Only the real listeners know to do that. The title of this episode is Interlude. Should we abandon the term people of color as an identifier? The identifier people of color is very central to the Evolving Education Project. So when we saw this term being questioned and or bashed on social media by Black folks and others in response to the election results, we decided that we needed to address it. For full transparency, on our website, we state, by people of color, we mean non-white individuals throughout the world who experience racism daily and who are affected by structural racism. Some groups that fall under the broad and vague category of people of color include people who identify as either Black, Brown, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, biracial, and or multiracial. Still, these identifiers can also be unclear when detached from ethnicity, language, tribe, culture, histories, nation, and land. Thus, at the Evolving Education Project, our discussions of people and groups of color are historically and contextually situated, responsive to the ever-changing times and political needs of particular groups among people of color, and attentive to their multiple intersecting identities. For example, gender, language, sexuality, ability, able-bodiedness, nationality, religion, social class, etc. Okay, so that's what we have on the website. But, still there is so much more to unpack given last week's election results. And with that, my good sis, Dr. Ruth M. Lopez, had some raw thoughts about all of this that she shared on social media. When her thoughts came across my feed, I knew she was exactly the comrade I needed to have this conversation with. Dr. Ruth Lopez is an associate professor in educational leadership and policy in the Department of Educational Policy Studies and Practice at the University of Arizona College of Education. She was previously a senior research associate at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University and an assistant professor at the University of Houston. Prior to earning her PhD, she worked as a college outreach counselor in Houston schools and a program coordinator of the Colorado Diversity Initiative at the University of Colorado Boulder. In her research, Dr. Lopez addresses the social and political context that students of color navigate across K-12 schools and their access to higher education. Her research examines the intersections of education and immigration policies, culturally responsive education and family engagement, and college access for Latinx and immigrant students. Dr. Lopez is proud of her multiple identities as the daughter of immigrants from El Salvador and Mexico, first-generation college student graduate, and mother scholar, to name a few. These identities inform her commitment to educational equity and college access. Because we are discussing the use of the term people of color as an identifier, and racial and ethnic identities will be so central to our conversation, I will also share my own bio, which is something that I don't normally do, but here we go. I am an assistant professor of education and women's gender and sexuality studies at a Research One university located in the northeastern region of the United States. I am also the creator, host, and producer of the Evolving Education Project podcast. I identify as a Black woman and ascendant of enslaved African peoples in the United States. My paternal grandparents were born in Bessemer, Alabama, and lived there until their migration to Buffalo, New York in the early 1950s. As a researcher, I employ critically conscious and humanizing research approaches to qualitative studies guided by various justice-oriented theories of race, Black girlhood, Black woman knowing, being, experiences, space, and becoming. Informed by my experiences as a middle school teacher, my research portfolio includes ethnographic and multiple case studies on supporting urban teachers committed to social justice through race, space, critical professional development, design-based research studies of learning environments, and literacy development and social justice literacy workshops for youth of color, and critical analyses of extracurricular programs and curriculum designed specifically for Black girls. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get into this conversation. This was a really long intro, I know. Here we go. Hi! Look.
Good to see
Especially
you.
when I know people. It's so
Yes.
it's so exciting.
I was just trying to remember, like, I know we were CSJ as well, right? Didn't we overlap there
Yeah, we
too?
were.
But then
That's
I
where we
was
worked more
remembering
closely
this.
together.
Yes, but then I was remembering our connection at CRSCA as well today. I was like, oh, I remember she was like, I remember you told us something, and it was about like relationships. I think you said. I think you were a grad student, right?
I
I think you were.
probably was. I think I
Yeah, and I
was.
think it was just like because it was like 2016.
Oh, I definitely was a grad student. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember because I'm pregnant with my daughter, so that's 2016.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I think it was like around this, like, oh, thank you for modeling that we could have families. You know, it was like
Oh,
that sort of
yes.
like conversation, right? Like, so
Oh,
I just remembered just how
you
much love
remember
you showed
that?
us
Oh
for
my
it.
God.
Yeah.
So, you know why I had you on here because I saw your post on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "Oh, my good sis is like getting in it for real." I said I said, "Oh, oh, she's not playing."
Yeah.
Oh,
Had been holding in some
okay.
thoughts.
So I don't know. Do you want to read your post or do you want me to read it so they can hear it or whatever parts of it you want to
Yeah.
read?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. No, thank you. Thinking just to give some context, I still hadn't had my coffee yet that morning. And I was even, yeah, I guess I'd been ruminating, right? And then
Yeah.
as I was like writing some notes for today, I was like, oh, it was 8:30 in the morning. You know, it's those times when these big events happen are kind of a blur when it comes to, to time. what did I know yet? What was I waiting to know? Right. So this is
Mhm.
literally like fresh, right? Fresh news. You wake up. I woke up that morning, told myself I wouldn't look at my phone just yet, right? But then like curiosity got me.
Yep.
And so these are very raw reactions informed by, I don't know, I guess a lot of things I've learned from folks like you and others and in my scholar community. And hurt and pain for all that work, right? That's kind of where it came from in a lot of ways. And as we were hearing about the subgroups, now that data is still not perfect and far from perfect, right? But as we were hearing the initial exit poll data, right?
Mhm.
What I could say with that limited information, but enough to know that there was some truth to it in terms of like what I was hearing from family,
Mhm.
in terms of how folks voted. So that's a little bit of context for
Yes.
where I was in my headspace and my heart, you know.
Yep.
Why don't you read it? I want to hear you read
Okay, you want me
it.
to read it? I will
Yeah.
say where I was in my headspace when I read this post that we
Yeah.
about to read.
Okay. Yes.
I had been seeing so much on Twitter, like Black folks saying like they're sick of the term people of color
Mm-hmm.
and we should just and Black people just need to stop caring about anybody else and they just need to care about their own people and forget everybody else because don't nobody care about us. So that's where I am. And this podcast is very much about people of color. Sometimes we do focus on specific groups. You know, I'm a very Black, pro-Black, everybody know that,
Mm-hmm.
identified
Yeah.
Black woman, but I also believe in solidarities and, you know, which we'll get into that and we'll get into like this feeling of just being like, forget everybody, like Black folks feel. So I came to your post having seen that all around and then I see your
Mm.
post and then I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, and so and so I'm just like, you know, this is who I need to talk to, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, and I want y'all to know, like, there's a lot of love here, a lot of respect here between us. We're
Yes.
not, even if we have different views, we're not coming at this against each other. And we may not have different views or we may talk through it, right? But it's just
Yeah.
like this is a I'm very careful with these conversations to folks that I can be vulnerable with, and that sometimes you can't have these type of conversations with everybody, people of color, as a Black person, because they, you know, then you get into like I was just on a committee with somebody and somebody was saying something like literally me and this other Black scholar said something about, you know, a racial frame. Like, okay, you need to
Mhm.
think about a racial frame. And then this other non-Black person of color was like, we have to move beyond the Black white binary. And I'm just like,
You said racial, not black white. Yeah.
and I'm just like, that type of stuff is just so freaking annoying because here I am pushing this person on something that will help your own group, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
help us have more nuances, understanding of your group of people that's non-Black people of color, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
coming at, you just hear two Black scholars saying something about race. Now you want to tell me about the Black. And I feel like when people say stuff like that, I don't feel like you really know critical race theory. That's how
Not
I
at
feel.
all. Yeah.
I feel like you don't even get it. And so I just want to say that you are very special to me. You are somebody that I look up
Mm.
to as an organizer and somebody that's really about this work. Like, that's how I look at you. That's how I see you.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I don't say it to you, that's how I see you. Like,
Thank
you are
you.
a real organizer to me. And I feel like you are someone who really calls out and attends to anti-blackness, but still very strongly in loving your own people and your own culture. And so even though this, you know, this podcast really, I say we center the educational joys and passionate interests and inquiries of people of color. And then on the website, I do go into detail, like being very specific about like
Mm-hmm.
how it's different for different groups. It matters to me. I'm very careful about who I can trust to have this nuanced conversation, you
Yes.
know. And I see you as a woman of color feminist. So I feel like we just like, it's so much like political
Mm.
commitments that are
Yes.
similar. Maybe not everything, I don't assume, but I mean, like, but you know, that we believe and we love our people. We love people of color. We,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call us, people who are racialized or
Yes.
whatever. We
Yes.
love and we hear and we fight in our different fronts. And so I just thank you for being such
Mm.
a beautiful example for me and somebody that I can feel comfortable with to have a conversation like this. So thank you, sis.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're gonna make me cry just because, like, this, like, this is the counter narrative, right? That we don't get to see, and you really put it so beautifully. And I think that when I do bring up these kinds of like conversations that make someone comfortable, I do think about how this might there's always like, oh, haven't you considered this or that? And it's like, well, Facebook post doesn't capture all the nuance, right? And so I'm just happy that we could, like, the way you described like your commitments. I'm very similar. I think very similarly, and done a lot of work, self work around that, and trying to live my life like that, like in that authenticity too. And so I just appreciate you recognizing that. We don't always it's hard to find people you don't have to explain some things to. And so I just really just love that. And I love that you said, we're not, I think we know that where things grow is not in like everyone getting along. It's from like these like ruptures, as Gloria and Saldua, shared with us. And so like I think that first love and respect is first here, and we've been in those spaces that have fostered that in us, right? We've had
Yes,
these like
we
shared
have.
academic journeys where we found these folks that saw that in us, or we felt seen and heard. And so I almost feel like we were building our tools. We are building our tools still for being able to engage in this moment, being able to be a leader as well, as an intellectual, as educators. I mean, I want to think that that's part of what we've been doing this time, right? And even though hasn't been easy along the way either. So I just really appreciate that. And I think the other thing is interesting to hear you say about what you were seeing on Twitter, because I hadn't seen those posts yet. And so even though I've heard that conversation, obviously, I even acknowledged that in my posts, but I hadn't seen that was the conversation going on that morning. And so that is interesting as well. And I guess I just kind of wanted to like, for maybe the majority of like Latinos that were in my social media, Facebook family in particular, right? That I felt like those excuses were going to start getting made. And so I was like, let me get in front of some of these things that are not going to be said. Almost like you said, your colleague said, right? Like trying to like find every other which way to maneuver this out of anti-blackness. Oh, it's economic reasons, it's religious reasons, and all of those are coded with other things that are unjust as well, family values, right? And
Yep.
so I just thought, like, if I can be that in between in some ways, right? Show that there's another way for solidarity, and just like acknowledge that no, we obviously these numbers show we're not all together. And I think that's one of my pieces as an academic, that gets to review a lot of work, is that, and I was even thinking about this after a few days, and I guess I still have to read the post. Should I start reading? Should I read it now? And then
Yeah, we
unpack
can we
it?
can read them. We done teased them
Yeah.
enough.
I know, because it's gotten me thinking. And I'm actually right now I wanted to share a shout out to the HSI Research Colectiva. I'm at a writing
Yes.
retreat, and I'm part of this group, and it's a critical group of scholars too, doing HSI work, mostly in California, but thinking about it across the country. So I just feel really fortunate to be in these spaces right now that allow me the space and time to think about this, because it isn't something we're going to cram for, right? Like figure out in a day. So I've just been really reaffirmed in the conversations happening here, even around the election and where we go next, right? So I guess let me read this in its messiness.
Yes.
So I propose we remove the terms Black and brown and people of color from our repertoire. Not my original idea. Folks have pushed for this before, or at least acknowledge the incorrect assumptions of solidarity these terms communicate. I think that's like my bolded part. These communities haven't been aligned as one would assume they would, given historical and contemporary racial oppression faced. My community, Hispanic Latino, because that's how it's presented, has some reckoning to do about their political alignment as a whole. I know we're not a monolith, but now more than ever, if we don't agree with the anti-blackness, anti-immigrant, anti-trans, sexism, misogyny, etc., it's on us to speak, act on it. And maybe I'll leave it there for right now.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of named sort of my background in this, because that's something that, as women of color, feminists, understand that we always have to give our credentials, right? So this is not just like how I feel at the moment. but it is something that I've been studying as well. And I will say I do relate a lot to the term people of color. And I was thinking, even when you said, I was like, maybe we're like capital P, capital C people of color, right? Like it's sort of this points to an alignment, a certain way of thinking and doing. And then I talked about just my commitment and my commitment to face this, to talk about it, to be messy, right? And so I'll stop there to see what you think, and then I'll go back because I forgot my other thought that I was gonna say.
Yeah, it stopped me in my tracks. It definitely stopped me. And it stopped me to the point that I didn't comment, I didn't like or dislike it.
Mm-hmm.
I just was like, oh, and I think because I do know your credentials and I know you know critical race theory. I know you know racial theory and I know, all these things that I was like, well, why would she say, like, giving her, you're not just somebody on here and everybody's
Yeah.
matter. You don't have to have, let me be very clear. I'm not
Yeah.
saying you have to have degrees to have a racial
Yeah.
analysis. I'm just
Exactly.
saying, like,
Right.
you've studied this very deeply. And so I was like, what does this mean? And I think I use these terms and I hold these terms dear, especially like black and brown and, and I do like what you said about capital P, capital C, but we're not all in solidarity with each other. Like, we're not. Like, that's true. And the anti-blackness is really, 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 really real. Like, even these people, I be sitting with people. That's why I said I'm not playing why I felt comfortable to talk to you.
Yeah.
Because even people that you, just like I said, I thought we all got it. And I got that comment about
Yes.
the black, white binary, and it's just
Yes.
like, oh, it just puts me, I hate to say this because it's going to sound so sad, but I feel like it makes me feel again that, oh, you don't see me as a scholar. You're a person of color. I'm a person of color. We all in here in this super white
Yes.
supremacist university system. And you don't see me as a scholar. I'm coming here excellent. Ruth, I come excellent.
Yes. Yes.
Okay? I
Yes.
come with my stuff together.
Yes.
I come ready.
Baseline.
Listen, that's the
Yes.
baseline. That's what we got to do. And I'm just
Yes.
like, still, and I purposely don't just, I'm always talking about a lot of things. I read across disciplines. I don't just read
Yes.
my little my area, and it's like I'm still doing all of this extra work, this intellectual work, showing this, and you're gonna reduce me to a black white binary if you don't get out of my face.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
So, I see this and I know you and I know your work, so I'm reading this differently. And I know what, so I felt it made me question some things, and it also made stuff very real. Like, it also affirmed something. It made me question, maybe like, yep, and we're not a monolith, but I also think, like, I struggle with this because it's like, and I also posted something that said, I posted something that said, like, how do you vote for a man that promised your people deportation? And like, I posted
Exactly.
something like that, like the day after, like, I was raw about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I'm not gonna act like I wasn't like, make this make sense. Like, I don't get it,
It doesn't make.
and so I think I could just be talking, interrupt me anytime, because I just
Oh,
I
well, let me, yeah, no, I think it is really, I love hearing your reaction to it, honestly, because you put these things out there, and I don't write many posts these days. Like, I honestly is like my dog, my kids, my travel, or things like that on my Instagram stories. Like, I don't have a lot, but I do remember, like, when I first came onto Facebook, like, I would write these kinds of like thought pieces, and it was a place for me to get some thoughts out to an audience that I know is varied, right? Because you have folks from
yes,
every point of my life on there. So it's one thing I do. I mean, social media has its, faults, but it's one thing I do think that that's where I'm going to have a broader group of people. And so I just appreciate just being able to be doing this with you as well, and unpacking it further, because I've just kind of been walking around and be like, I want to edit it. I want to do this. I want to do that. But I think I need to honor where it was. And I think that maybe what I was thinking about is the Black community that I'm, in my village, right? And the way we were talking pre-election about, like, in solidarity, right? And not even beyond solidarity, to say, how are we together feeling about this election? Oh, can you believe this is happening in Texas, right? And then I felt like I have a responsibility in this, right? After this, like, it's almost like, I guess, the first election, right? And we saw the number. I don't want to say it's the same thing, but I've been thinking about it, like when we see the white women and how they voted, in especially how much attention that got in 2016, right? Was that when that was? I forgot.
Yeah.
2020, both times. And so I was like, what does this mean? Even though it's not the majority, of Latina women, which I want to acknowledge that, right? But what does that mean? Like, what responsibility do I have? I'm implicated in that, right? And so I want to take responsibility for that, even if it's not the way I voted, because I don't want to become that, right? Well, it's not me, it wasn't me.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's more complicated than that. One, and I think that's an opportunity for me to model, right? Like, hey, I can talk about my privileges. I can talk about what I'm gonna do, right? What's my responsibility in this moment, and it's not gonna fix these like tensions and this hurt, this pain that might have been created by looking at these numbers, is distrust, right? But I feel like I'm gonna be able to do something about it, and or I want to do something about it, like as a mom, right? Like, want to do something about it in that way. So I think that's where I was at in that piece. And I mean, to your point about the deportation piece, like, there are, again, there's this data and then there's the stories, right, that you're hearing.
Mm.
And you're hearing about mixed status families, right, where some of the family voted for Trump, and knowing that there would be mass deportations, and the sort of respectability piece of like, well, we came here the right way. No, like, that's actually inaccurate and historically inaccurate. And so that's one, people don't know their history, right? We haven't been taught our
Yep.
history, haven't been taught our
Yep.
language, and that's one piece. Like, LGBTQ plus folks, like, also, right, of color, who their families voted for Trump, right? And so yeah, I think it's that's what I thought about as an educator, right? I mean, that's what they're trying to take away, is us being able to teach more and more of this history at all levels, and the reality of it. And so I think it's a direct result, honestly. And so I think that I can look at it in that level too, and then take it away from the individual. And that's, I think, as critical race scholars, like, that's what we're pushed to do, right? Is that what was functioning at a systemic level that made it so that it was acceptable, to being able to make this decision and not understand each other, right? Each side is sort of like within
Mhm.
families. So that's another thing I think it's going to be interesting. There's so much data now that I'm not a quantitative researcher, but I think there's so much we could do together. And the qualitative piece of like the stories, right? There's these
Yeah.
stories that I think we're going to have to document at some way or another. So I really appreciate you having this podcast as one way to document it, and that we can
Yeah.
hopefully be having a different conversation in the future. I want to believe that. And I feel like a responsibility to do something about that. And so talking to folks of different walks of life, right, in my community, just being able to bring what we've learned to community and spaces. But I was thinking, I remembered what I was going to say earlier about, like, or at least acknowledge the incorrect assumptions of solidarity these terms communicate. I thought about my role as a reviewer. So kind of going back into academic spaces a little bit. As a reviewer, I often get work like about Latinx students, right? Critical race theory, but sometimes about emergent bilingual students. And
Mhm.
a lot, not all of it, but a lot of work is missing this it's ahistorical, and it lacks nuance. It makes assumptions, right? Like, a lot of the assumptions I've seen is Latinos just got here, right? There's like, no, like, there's so much more to that, right? Oh, we're seeing an influx of immigrants. Actually, no, the numbers have declined, over time. Or that all emergent bilinguals are Latino or Latinx, right? So there's so much in there. And I just thought about, like, Black and Brown, people of color. This is another area where I think, as critical scholars, like, pushing the field to say, what do you mean by that, right? Even if you're going to use this term. So I'm a big fan of, like, footnoting, explaining, right, where
Yep.
I'm coming from. being okay with like multiple, even for my own self. Like I'm Central American, my mom's from El Salvador, I'm Mexican, identify as also Chicana, Latina, Tejana, right? And so
Yep.
it's okay. It's okay to have longer identities, right? And explain
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think that that's something I've heard even, I haven't talked a lot about like the responses I got, but I think it's something that's really
Yeah.
important is like that Latinx is not a racial term, right? And also the anti-black Latinx folks, that there's work. Shout out to Dr. Jasmine Haywood's piece that she posted as a comment in there, and she studied anti-black Latinos during the first Trump election. And so there's that, and Afro Latinos, right? And indigenous Latinos,
Yep.
and I fluctuate between, I go Latinx, Latinos. I'm using Latinos more because like that's what's been presented in like these graphs, right?
Right.
Using so yeah, there's interesting responses. Before I jumped on today, I was like, let me summarize some of these like points that came up. But I will say, like, people have been nice. Like, I mean, I feel like they were vulnerable. Like they shared how they were
Yeah.
feeling, but they like didn't like, I didn't feel like I saw a debate in the my side wins, your
No.
side wins kind of as a response. There's 48 comments, including some of my responses. But what did you think? Did you read some of those too?
I thought I appreciated it wasn't combative. It wasn't like we're going to debate, but it was definitely people saying, well, this is what I think about it. And I think that is very productive because we also want people to be honest.
Yes.
I think so. I have issues sometimes on Facebook, especially because it's such a broad range of people from different parts of my life.
Yes.
That I usually have issues with men. Like, and it could be family members or where if I say anything about,
I think mine must have given up on me. So
yeah, some of them I just unfriended because I'm like, you don't have an authority over me on my Facebook post. You don't have an authority over me anyway. But whatever authority you think you have due to patriarchy, you're not about to demonstrate it here because you could,
exactly.
So I am always prepared. Like, I think that because I come back at them, they think, those fragile men, they think that you have a problem with folks disagreeing with you or going back and forth. But there's a tone and a tenor of which that is very condescending or dismissive. Even the nice guys, the quote unquote nice guys, right?
Yeah.
That is very patriarchal. That is very different than we're having like, this is how I feel, but I'm not trying to put you in your place. I'm not dismissing what you're saying. I'm not. And so that's what I felt. But it was very interesting to me too. So that's why I was like, like, because I also felt like it was some things that I was like, oh,
how's she gonna respond to that? What is she gonna say next?
Yes. And the way you responded was very like, not like, because some people do this, I don't know. And I used to do it when I was a young doc student where I would like play a teacher role in these comments. Like, it's not that what you're doing, but
We're
it's
not neutral.
very, it's dialogic, it's challenging, but it's listening as well. Like, as much, listening through a post, but listening and having this really deep listening and holistic listening, reading rather, of what is being said. And that helps when you have the level of relationship with people. Like, people jump on these posts, and then sometimes even if I don't have that level of relationship with you, how are we engaging, right?
Yes.
And so I just wanted to say that because, like, I know the difference between
you've experienced
women,
that,
women, they come for you. These men, these hetero men come for you hard. Like, and they don't even notice it. Like, they're so fragile and they're so sensitive to whatever you say. And it be our own people. And it's like, just because you're not that man that I'm talking about, the majority, like, if you really said into some assessments, the majority of your homies is raggedy, and this does apply to them. Maybe not you. You know what I mean? Like, like,
well, it's that sort of, it's like an equivalent of the reaction I was expecting, right?
Yeah.
Like, that there's gonna, it's kind of a similar vibe,
like,
or energy. Me. Yeah, not me. I'm one of the good ones,
danger
right?
of not me is like, not me, therefore this doesn't apply. You're making a generalization to all men. Where it's like, not you, but
Exactly.
75% of the time this is true. So stop it.
Yeah, and you have power within that group to like challenge it. You
Yeah,
know,
are
what are you
you
gonna
pushing
do
that? You see
if
them
it?
being raggedy? Are you saying anything? So
Oh, I mean,
I
it
that's
is
that's what I
vulnerable to
saw.
put it out there. Yeah, no, thank you. Like, it is vulnerable to put it out there. There's sometimes that I post something that's like kind of like that. I mean, it's been a while, and I just want to hide under a rock, close the comments, right?
Yes.
And being like, because sometimes we just need to desahogarnos, like get it out of us,
Yes.
right? Like, and that's I want to acknowledge that too. I just needed to write it. Maybe I need a journal, right? Which I know it's something I need to go back to, a practice I need to go back to. So it's like my Facebook journal, my little blog posts that I never got around to
Yes.
creating blogs when those were a thing, you know? But I think, yeah, I think even like as you're sharing that, I think, well, that's probably why I felt the need to name my credentials, is that in the past, there have been these kinds of pushbacks, right? Not that that's going to stop some folks, because I mean, you got it in that committee, right? Like, not that that's going to stop folks, but it is important to acknowledge, because a lot of them do know us from, not that you should treat anybody like that, but as we're going to be frozen in time for whenever they met us, right? And
Yep.
so, and I know I don't communicate. I mean, it's hard to communicate or have time to communicate everything I'm doing, right, to folks. So it's sort of like that piece as well. What else was I going to say about? Oh my gosh, there's so much. There's so much about this. No, thank you for sharing the piece about even the engagement, because it to me is an example of like what we do as professors, as teachers too,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
imagine your classroom is similar in the sense that we're like taking apart texts, and
Yeah.
like creating some norms and expectations for that. So I think I applied that in that stance in my responses, even though I took a lot of some deleting and some retyping and being like, how's this gonna come off? I also don't tend to be like, even though I'm on my phone a lot, I don't tend to be attached to like, responding things. But I knew if I waited too long, they would think I didn't want them to think I was ignoring them, or, this was
Right.
just a one-way conversation. I also got some amazing resources, stuff I need to read,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm grateful for that knowledge. I think that other Latinx folks also felt validated, because I saw people that usually don't like my posts like it. I was like, oh, I didn't know I was on your algorithm, right? Like, and so that told me something. It gave me some hope. Like, it did really give me some
Yes.
hope. It gave me like an acknowledgement that I could use the tools I have beyond academia, beyond higher ed, and I feel like that's something we also talk about in community engaged work, but it's hard to do. And even for myself, it's really hard to do sometimes. So I love those moments where I can say, no, I have some skills that like I can translate. Maybe I'm not going to write about how I translated it, but we can leverage our critical praxis in
Yeah.
Facebook, in our communities with kids. The kids were around, with anyone, right? As anyone. So
Yep.
I've been having some of these conversations offline too, and I've just felt really affirmed, and challenged in a good way. Like, I feel like I've been downloading articles or screenshotting things, right? Like, so much.
Yep.
I'm like, that's making me feel a little bit better right now. Maybe I'm coping, right? I just need more information. I need to learn a little bit more, because I do feel like I got comfortable. I was like, I wasn't as involved, right? And for different reasons, right? In the political process, I'm also like, honestly, like, feeling let down, right, by it.
Yeah.
But I also was, not uninvolved either, but it just sort of
I
made
think
me
we're
realize,
tired
like,
though.
yeah,
If I can be
you're tired.
fair,
Yes.
I think you
Thank
should give
you.
yourself some grace. I think
Yeah.
people who really do
Hmm.
this stuff every day, you didn't hear a lot
Hmm.
of us saying a lot about this election. I think folks were
That's
just
true.
tired. And I think like
Yeah.
we had critiques about both sides. Like, and so
Yes,
it was just like,
exactly.
I
That's the
couldn't,
sentiment I feel. Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't about to fully 100% be like, Kamala Harris, but then I couldn't, but then the other thing, obviously that was my only choice to vote for, but also it's like,
Exactly.
and then also it's such a fragile time because we always get blamed when these things go wrong. The real activists, the real organizers, the people who are speaking against like the people who are speaking with political clarity and not just loyalty that, oh, this is great, this is a black woman, this is that and the other. We get blamed when things go left. Just like they blamed us for people not voting in 26, what was it,
Yeah.
2016? Like that was the
Mm-hmm.
critical people. So that was the activists, the revolutionaries, the radical
Right.
folks, the militant folks. It's our fault
Yeah.
that they didn't
Yeah.
vote, and not the failure
Yeah.
of the Democrats to attend to youth, to attend to poor folks, to take a stand for Palestine. You know,
Exactly.
like it's not none of that. It's us. And
No.
so I think like that was very tiring and that was very exhausting in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people just like, I didn't want to post about it. I wasn't excited about, I mean, she was the better choice. I think she's a black woman. That's a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
thing with that.
It would have
But
been
I wasn't
historic. Yeah.
excited about her. I'm just being
Yeah.
honest. I wasn't. And I wasn't, and we know how we feel about Trump, right? So it was just like
Yeah.
I didn't see nobody saying anything really. I really didn't
Yeah.
see anybody. So I think like, and I also think like at this point we've done so much work. We've, especially with the last two elections, it's like people know more than they act like they know, and they're just choosing what they're choosing. And I think even within our own groups,
Yes.
even with people of color, black people, if you want to say
Mm-hmm.
Latinos, who didn't vote for Trump, I don't think, and the ones who did vote for Harris, I don't think we're having enough critical conversations of Harris. Like, even if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
vote for her, right?
Yeah.
Even if this is our choice and this is all we got, don't let up on the critique. Don't let up on the
Yeah.
nuance. Don't let up on, be very clear about
Yes.
what's happening. Like, I know what I signed up for, instead of, this is just because just because you choose to vote for some, this is what I want more from us.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you choose to vote for someone, that doesn't mean that they're not flawed. That doesn't mean that
Exactly.
they're perfect, or that they are above, even if you're excited about a black woman being president,
Mm-hmm.
even if
You
there's
can
a
be
lot
all
of
these
beauty,
things.
you could be all those things. There's a lot of beauty
Yeah.
in her.
Yes.
I will say that there's
Yes.
a lot of beautiful things about her. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean you can't sit up here and critique. And I think that's what I can't stand, is like,
Yes.
it's either this or this, and you
Like
can't.
we want
And
this
then,
one like savior kind of,
yes,
person, but that's not.
and then you're not
Yes.
having the conversation, and that's why we only talk about voting, because then
Mm-hmm.
that's what I always ask, like, what is your political project when the election is over? Like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not just voting. Like, I'm so sick of it. Like, you
Yes.
have to,
Mm.
we can't just
I
get
love
on
that
these bandwagon. And
question.
this is why we get to these type of results, because
Mm-hmm.
ain't nobody doing nothing until it's time, election
Mm-hmm.
time,
Fires, yeah, yeah. Once
you
the
know?
fires are there, you're kind of like, oh, let's like cram
Yes.
and fix it. I'm so glad you said all this. I don't think she'll mind me sharing, but this is the way that something that Dr. Subinyanama and I have been talking about this, and she said something of like, she shared a video with me. Is like, this captures, what I've been feeling like. We're gonna elect the person that we can fight, that we can push, right? That's who we would
Yes.
want to have there, and I think that that's what Kamala and her party, represented, her, and her VP, is that like we're not gonna like they're not gonna go unchallenged, right? I mean, you saw like even with President Obama, like when DACA passed, a deferred action for childhood arrivals, like that was because activists like crashed some of his speaking events, right, and challenged
Hmm.
him in front of the camera to push for this kind of, it was an immigration reform, but to pass an executive order after the Dream Act didn't pass. So that has been a strategy, right,
We
to be
have
able
to
to
do
get,
that.
to help our communities, right? And this, I
Yes.
don't know what that's going to look like under this presidency.
Moving forward, if we'll even be able to do that. So
Hmm.
I do want to ask you some
Hmm.
specific questions about your post, and then I want to say some
Okay.
things about it before we run
Yeah.
out of time. So why would you propose, just so we can understand,
Yes. Yes.
to remove black and brown? I think
Yeah.
people of color I get, but you can
Yeah.
explain it. But black and brown.
Yeah. I mean, I still want to have the black and brown party at A. I haven't gotten into this.
Yes, we
Just
still
kidding.
gotta have our black and brown party, honey. Yes,
Yeah.
honey.
So
Or is it
I
that,
honestly, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, or is it that when we don't say what we mean by it is the
That I
problem?
think that I think that's part of. I think the first
Okay.
part of my it's like a sexy title, right? Like when you're like say
Mhm.
something like for a paper, you're like, "Ooh, I want to read this paper,"
Black and
right?
brown
And I
youth.
and I always say I don't have good titles usually, so props to me for coming up with something catchy. I always like regret my paper titles. I'm like they're so boring. I think part of it acknowledged some of my pain. Like we don't deserve, like I don't know who we is, but we
Okay,
like
Ruth.
we don't deserve it, right? And it has
Mm.
to be earned. It has to come from like let me give you a moment. And so that I think it was my pain, honestly, and that I was putting there. And at the same time, it was also I didn't plan it that way, but I think I think about like what are things that are gonna grab people's attention, right? I didn't think about it that way, but maybe I thought that like I'm just gonna put my feelings out there, regardless of how it's taken up, like regardless of how people react. Maybe it was like my
Mhm.
unfiltered and like that's what grabbed people's attention, right? And so later on is when I reflected like, oh yeah, that was kind of bold to put that out there and
I'm glad you
and
did.
and open it up to, so that's me unfiltered. My I should tell you my nickname. So
Oh
in
God.
college I was part of Mecha, the Chicano rights youth group. Have you heard of it? Movimiento Estudiantil
No.
Chicano, that's LAN. And so it's came out of the Chicano movement. They were very instrumental in getting like Chicano studies, right? And my background's Mexican American studies. My nickname in undergrad was Ruthless. It's my alter ego.
Oh, oh, I
So,
can see that
because
name is fitting.
yeah, so that's Ruthless. That's my that's my alter ego.
Yeah,
Because I
because I
think
said,
people, I mean, I think you and I we're sisters in a lot of ways. And I think part of
mhm,
the way that your energy, folks mistake that, right? This loving, kind of like kind, nurturing energy. Folks don't know how to interpret that. They think they can run over it. They take it as naivety,
yep,
as ignorance,
mhm,
and I think that's probably the case for a lot of women, right?
mhm,
And so that ruthless was sort of like, just because I look like this, also I'm green eyes, light skin, all these things.
mhm.
Just because I look like this doesn't mean I want to agree with you, and I'm not thinking of a different answer to this, right? And
And just because
so
you extend care and you're loving, like, I'm just so
exactly.
sick of that. Like, that doesn't mean that I'm not
Hmm.
gonna challenge you in particular ways or that you about to come doing everything, and guess what? I'm still loving and I'm still caring. No. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of that tone for that one, but I think that's you captured it really well, is that I do call for like the unpacking of it. What do you mean by that? Like do you mean that our lived realities are the same, that there are groups of folks that have been historically marginalized, disenfranchised, right? Is that the group of brown folks that we're talking about? It's maybe, yeah, I think that coming from that political term, that I think is what you brought up
yeah.
too, right? When we started talking about this offline, is that there is utility for that. But I think these results have showed us for all groups, right, that
Mhm,
it isn't a blanket, right, group. And I
mm-mm.
think that's where the media misses the mark. I think there's a lot of think these little circle roundtables that I told a chat group, that I was a group chat. I was like, oh, we should have one of those tables, right, where we could sit around and talk politics and things like that. But I think that that's something that gets wrong. Is like the Latino vote, the Black vote, right, the
Yes,
Asian vote, the other
yes.
vote, right, and it just tries to get
Mhm.
simplified. And I think because of how it gets simplified, there's an assumption of solidarity amongst the groups, amongst and between and within,
And
and
trust.
that's not the
Mhm.
case. Yeah, so I think I mean, having grown up in Black and brown community, like for me, I do connect a lot with it. But I just think that acknowledging the weight it carries, right,
Mhm.
and that it's just not something to just throw around, right? So, and I don't
Yeah.
think the folks that I engage with actually do that, right? I think that, but I
Right.
think I mostly was responding to the way that media takes it up too, and like I said, and
Yeah.
sometimes in scholarship,
Yep. And people of
in
color
our
determine.
call, yeah, and folks, yeah,
Yeah,
yep,
and all of that, and I will tell you this, I never liked BIPOC. I never liked it, and
yeah,
I
yeah.
like
I've heard
people
arguments against it too.
yeah, I like people of color more than BIPOC because I felt like if then just say Black people, and we
Yeah.
ain't never talking about indigenous people. So stop. Like,
Yeah.
just because you
Yeah.
put that I
Yeah.
there, are you really even in your mind thinking about indigenous people right now? Like really thinking,
Or spell it out. Or spell it out
yes,
too.
yeah,
Like if.
spell it out. It's because the BIPOC.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, just like
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, spell out people. I don't do I get it. I get it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
POCs is, people know what you're talking about, but I really write out people of
Yeah.
color because I just don't
Yeah.
even want to simplify us anymore. But what I find interesting is, so I did a little bit of, because I was like, this people of color, because I know I look at it when I
Yeah.
use it, I'm thinking of it more as a political term, as a political
Yes.
identity, what Lainey Guinier and Gerald Torres would call like this political race
Mm-hmm.
that talks about how we're working together towards social change, although these different communities have different, but it's like a diagnostic tool, it's an aspirational tool, it's these things
Yeah.
that we're working towards that helps us to understand these systems and structures that harm and marginalize each of our groups. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking up this because I know that the people of color that I use and how I understand it, thinking of an ethnic study sense, really came from people of color as opposed to using minorities, right? And so I found this article, this
Mm-hmm.
Washington Post article that talks of that. I never knew this, that actually Black scholars, not Black scholars, I would say Black newspapers and Black folks started to use in the 60s and 70s, like around the civil rights movement. They
Yeah.
started to use people of color, and you can find it a lot in Black newspapers in the 60s because they
Mm.
were trying to, but at first they were just talking about black black folks and Latino folks. So at first they were
Mm-hmm.
just talking about, like, they were making
Mm-hmm.
solidarities with Black and Latino folks, and then later on they included other people when they were using it, like other groups of people of
Mm-hmm.
color. And then in the late 80s, according to this article, roughly half of their people of color usage began to meet, include a lot of different groups of people of color. And that's when we started to see that identifier more, but it's more of ownership from people of color taking it on, and more of like a solidarity in a political term, even
Mm-hmm.
though it's differences. And so what I find interesting is that this term is, like, according to this article, like this
Mm-hmm.
term is first used by Black folks to make solidarity with
Yeah.
other people of
Right.
color.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now they feel we feel like, I'm talking
It's
about I'm saying,
yeah.
like, when I see
Especially
on
given
Twitter
the
and
narrative
everything,
you're seeing. Yeah.
yes, it's like, this
Never
don't bit
mind.
us in the butt. And I don't even know
Yeah.
if we know that history, but I
Right.
do think it also sucks because it's also like another way of Black people putting their neck on the line for other people, and we still always get screwed. It seems like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I saw that, but then I found this other article. Now this is an academic article, um,
Okay.
and I think it's a quant study, and it's from 2023, and it talks about people of color as a category and identity in the United States. And towards the end, I ain't doing all this quant stuff. I'm trying to grow in quant, but
Yeah.
that ain't it right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they they estimate that like only 27% of American adults self-identify as people of color.
Mm.
And it suggests that we should caution, like you're saying, in assuming that the growing populations, they say Hispanics, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
say
Yeah.
Latinx and Asians,
Right.
will necessarily lead to a national majority who sees themselves as people of color. I
Yeah.
also think what is very important is that what I'm always looking for, and even among Black people, I don't assume when I see you as a Black person that we speak in the same language, that we have the same
Yeah.
commitments. I have to hear
Mm-hmm.
what your politics is. And I
Yeah.
think that you choosing, if you're going to call yourself a person of color or not, you either, for me, I'm a have a more, I'm a like want to get to know your politics if you either
Yeah.
call yourself a person of color or you call yourself your racial group or your ethnicity. That's,
Exactly. Yeah.
then I can get with that, and I
It
can
sends a
kind of,
message.
it sends a message. Like, I feel like that's what I'm trying to say, Ruth, is that it sends a message. It's a signal. It's a
Mm-hmm.
signal, like,
Yes.
it's just a signal. And even if we're not all the same, and
Yes.
and I know that we're not all the same, but I know that I got to look out for Black people. I know
Yes.
that I have to be vigilant about anti-blackness and when I'm getting played by other folks of color and that
Yeah.
anti-blackness come up. But I'm not willing to abandon solidarities with people of color. I'm just
Yes.
not willing
Yes.
to totally abandon that just because of that. But I'm also not going to sacrifice what black people fighting for black folks and fighting against anti-blackness. And so that's where I sit with it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm thinking through and I'm trying to figure out because it does hurt. It does hurt when even with, you know,
Say it.
I
Say
think
it.
we talk a lot about I think we talk a lot about Latinx folks and the anti-blackness stuff, but I'm not going to say anti-blackness, but I even think with other groups like indigenous people, Asians and stuff, where it's like, even if it's not anti-blackness, but it's not a solidarity. And that
I think
hurts.
sometimes
You
it's
know,
just like oppression
it's just
Olympics
you.
or like, yeah.
Yeah. Or it's just your people. And it's like, there's moments where, and you should fight for your people. Like like there's going to be moments where where you got to just be talking about your people right now. But if we are in a room together and something happens
Yes.
amongst us, I need you to talk in a solidarity
Are you
way.
going to have my back? Yeah. Are you going to just
Yes.
stay quiet, talk to me later after the meeting and tell
Yes.
me
Or when you
that
do
you
say something,
agreed?
it's
Yeah.
only about your group's interest.
Yep.
That's just like me, you, and
Yep.
say one of my Asian sisters, we all experience harm as a woman of color. Say something happens where we experience harm. And when it's time for us to talk about it or confront, I'm just going to act like this just happened to me as a black woman.
Yeah.
And I can go in and out and say, as a black woman, blah, blah, blah. But what happened to women of color is blah, 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 blah. And then I can go, I can do that. That
Yes.
hurts. That really hurts
Yes.
hard. That
Yes.
really hurts. Because I feel
Yes.
like in that moment, you can't do that. Like you just, this is a moment where you need to be in solidarity and we're in solidarity with you, sis. Like,
Yes.
we're in solidarity with
Well, and
you.
I think that's part of my pain too, is that like I value and I privilege that I have these relationships, like with folks like you, right? With other black women. And it has taken a lot of unlearning, right? Because I was raised a certain way as well. And I know it could be done, right? I know it can be done, but yeah, it's sort of like this, like you have to put aside a scarcity myth, right? That, and also just like stop being afraid. Like, what are you so afraid of? To me, like, you don't lose anything, but you shouldn't even think about what you're going to lose, right? And standing up for what's right. And I think as a mom, that's what I'm trying to teach too. And like, I don't know, I got joy from during the Olympics. Like my daughter, who she was still 7, turning 8, and she's like, I want the black woman to win, right? Like in the Olympics, that's who she would root for like. And I'm like, yes, like there's something that I'm teaching this
Like, you
child,
did
right?
so right.
I don't know what country she's from, but like, and I think it doesn't take anything away from like my identity as a Latina, right? Or Salvadoreña, as a Mexicana. Like, if anything, I feel like so fortunate and blessed, like that I get to live and teach this to my kids. And so I just don't know. I've observed exactly what you're talking about. In grad school, a lot of us, that's how I met Subini and other friends. They started a group called RISE, Racial Initiatives for Students and Educators, and we would have these conversations. Like, if somebody says this in class, what are we going to do other than making eye contact, right? And so there was almost like an agreement, like we're going to stand up for each other. And I really appreciate like being part of it. I wasn't even a grad student yet, but I was taking classes. So like I just like was like, want to be friends with this group of people. And that aligned with what I had done in undergrad, right? In these activist spaces too. But it takes, I don't know, I think it takes like, are we going to need to like practice workshops, modeling, like what needs to be done, right, to be able to get to that place without putting more labor on black women, because that's where I think this comes from, right? Like for me, this post is like, what are my commitments to doing some of this? But I agree with everything you've said about like the term, its utility, and on the history of it, right? Like honoring that history. I'm big on like that piece. I think my hesitancy and where these footnotes are needed, right? Like show me what you mean by this, and that, is that like a lot of terms, they've become like apolitical, and include a lot of, like maybe not a this historic piece that you're talking about coming from the 1960s, like I was at that Black Power movement maybe, or like,
Yeah.
I
And the
didn't know that.
brown
I want to read
power.
that piece. Yeah. Yeah. The Chicano movement and how those were happening at the same
Yeah.
time. Asian Americans also,
Yep.
indigenous folks fighting for their rights. And so that's where the term comes from. But like I've seen it just like so many other terms, like getting co-opted, right?
Yep.
And and now we haven't even, we'll need a whole another podcast to talk about what that means in an anti-affirmative action kind of reality. But I think
Oh,
something that, I know we're over time, but I feel like one thing I wanted to also say as we're, and I think I said it in another post, is like, just because like my post is here, it doesn't mean I don't acknowledge that 70% of voters are white, that the majority of them voted for Trump, right? And
mm-hmm.
and and I think that that's something that's also lost in the conversation. It's almost like we can't. It's
Yes.
almost like this message being sent, like, don't air out our dirty laundry, because that's not who's wrong here, right? And I know that
Mm-hmm.
that's a big thing that's a big thought to end say at the end, but I guess that's also something I didn't say it's almost like, what else? To me, I was like, oh, maybe like, what else? It's sad that I have to say all these things, right? Like that's not where that is. But I think that's something where I want to give space to folks as I see these posts, is like me, myself, not assume like, oh, they're not thinking about other things at the same time, right? So,
Yes.
but I mean, it led to us having this awesome conversation.
I'm so glad you posted it because I was like, I know I wanted to say something and I wanted to, but I don't like to say, I like to be in conversation with folks. And
Mm-hmm.
so the jury's out. The question was, should we abandon the identifier of people of color? And I don't think we came to no conclusion.
No, I mean, I think we came to. Do we ever? Right? We have to
Right,
be
right.
messy and gray in all the ways, right? And that's the
Yes,
question. Like, yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that it's gonna keep giving me pause, right? What
mhm.
do they mean by that, right? And I think we need to be out there getting interviewed, right? In these, I mean, you have the podcast, so I'm glad that you have that space to be able to put this narrative out there, right? But I think we need to see that more. These discussions be had, at the national level as well. So yeah,
Yes,
I don't think we're abandoning it just yet. We were talking, it was a hurt. We're still hurt, but I want to
yes.
hear what other folks have to say too.
Yes, yes. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Ruth,
Yeah.
for being here. This was so great, so easy, such
Oh,
an easy
because of
interview.
you. No, thank you. I can't believe, I mean, at first I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I have something coherent to share,
Oh,
and I really just appreciate you having, this space for you, because I think for me, I just felt like there was so much that I wanted to get out, and for giving me the opportunity to do that. I think I shared with the group that like I've been speechless a lot the
yeah,
last week, which is not normal for me, and it's hard because like having to break some pretty sad, realities to younger folks sometimes, like my kids, right? Younger grad students, right? That are asking like, can this really happen? And when you know your history, right? Like, and you're a racial realist, and
yep,
but also want to maintain hope, right? It's these hard moments. So I just appreciate that you opened the space, and hope that we can keep talking. And it's so nice to talk
yeah.
beyond just like saying hi at a conference.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
Nah, we gonna talk. Look,
Yes. Let's do it.
but
Let's do
anyway,
it.
yes. Thank you for coming, and I'm gonna ask you again. Not, I'll
Thank
give you a break
you.
now. I'll give you a
No,
break
I'm
though, but
here. I can be a guest.
but
I
I
can be a
will
guest
because
on
this was
here.
just listen. But when the conversation flow, those are the people you need to just be like, we need to
Well,
come back. So
I'll
thank
let you
you.
in on a little story. When I was little and I spoke only Spanish, I
Yes.
used to record myself like if I was a news person. Like yeah, yeah, and like I wish I still had those tapes, but I used to like, yeah, like have
Oh
this
my
whole thing. And then my
gosh.
dissertation was on media analysis, so I feel like it is like something that
Oh, you
maybe
shouldn't have
it's a
told me
gift.
none of
I
that.
don't know. Maybe it's something that like I've always sort of had that, and being able to
Yes.
talk to. I've always been kind of like this, like like what is it called? Like when you're an old soul, right? Like being able to
Yeah.
talk to people of different ages, even as a kid. I've always been talkative, so so I think that was part of it. So I just appreciate you're helping me fulfill a dream
Ooh,
to come on a podcast. Yeah.
yeah,
So thank you. It's
yes.
my first. I think
And
this
we
is my
going
first podcast. I've been on the news, but that's different. You have like 2-3 seconds. Yeah, yeah. I
oh
was
no,
on
this is
on
gonna be
Spanish news
edited
once.
beautiful. It's
Yeah,
gonna
a
be
lot of.
on there. We're gonna hear what you said.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
So
I
this is
just
gonna, and
appreciate
I'm
you
gonna
so
air
much.
this week because it's so
Oh
timely.
my
So I gotta
god,
hurry. So
yes.
Wednesday, so I'm hurry up and get it together so
Yeah,
we can do it. But I don't want to let you go, but I should let you go.
I
I just have to
know.
have you back.
Okay, I'm down whenever. Yeah,
Okay.
I really really am. Let's do this. It feels good. I feel like we're doing
Yeah.
something, right? We're always doing
Yes.
something, but just like
Yeah.
something that like fulfills us, not just drain us, right? So
Yes.
I really
It's like
we're gonna
helping
need
others, but it's
more of
also
that.
good for us.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I hope to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Okay, you all heard Ruth say, or should I say Ruthless say, she would be willing to come back anytime. I will take her up on that. So much to think about in terms of using people of color or black and brown. And it is painful that we are even here giving the powerful histories of those identifiers. We hope you will think more and with others about what solidarity looks like in the context of anti-blackness. And now that the election is over, we hope that you will seriously consider your political project beyond voting, if you haven't already, because there is much for us to do. Even though the future may feel a bit daunting, we can't lose hope. Thank you for listening to Interlude. Should we abandon the term people of color as an identifier? The articles and books mentioned in this episode will be linked in the show notes. If something from this episode resonates with you, please share it with others and let us know through our website, evolvingeducationproject.com, or via social media. Be sure to tune in for our new series next Wednesday. I know I told you last week that we were going to be starting a new series this week, but we had to do this episode. I'm sure you know why. The new series will start for sure next week. Trust, you do not want to miss it. To find out more about the Evolving Education Project, to write in, or to join our listserv, check us out at evolvingeducationproject.com. And please subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram, X, YouTube, and Facebook. If you can only choose one, please follow us on Instagram and love all of our posts. Support that doesn't cost a dime. If you've been enjoying our podcast, you can also support us by writing a review. Favorable reviews help more educators, organizers, families, communities, and activists find us. We hope to continue to cultivate an authentic audience and community. We want you to help us to evolve over time and shape what this could be. Now that you know what we're about, let us know what you want to learn more about, authors that you would like us to interview, discussions you would like to have. Okay, that's all for now, good people. Tune in next Wednesday for a new episode. We out.